Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the Blog Cabin to chat about life. And today, Janet is joining us, and we're going to be talking about adoption and specifically her book, Abandoned at Birth, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me. And it's such a great read. So, Janet, thank you for coming on the show. Before we start talking about the book, because it's hard to say describe yourself without talking about the book, because the book is about your story. But before we dive into the book, tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you. I'm Melissa. I'm really happy to be here. I always really start out any introduction about myself to say I was adopted at birth. Well, actually 6 weeks in, and that actually is the most significant event of my life. I mean, everything that followed was really predicated on my experience at being an adoptee, how I felt, the things I lost, the grief and the sorrow I felt, even though I was in a perfectly lovely adopted family. So that is a very significant part of my life. And the fact that I spent my life searching for who I really was. Why do I look like this? Why do I have this sense of humor? Why do I like the things I like? And outside of that, I now live on the island of Nantucket, which is 30 miles off the coast of Massachusetts. I have 2 grown sons, a first beautiful little baby granddaughter, and my husband of, let's see, gosh, I don't know how many years now, 48 years.
Wow.
I'm enjoying living at the edge of the city.
Well, I love that. And Nantucket, it's so beautiful. My parents grew up in Massachusetts, so I know the Massachusetts area. So that's a beautiful state. So what made you decide to write this book, Abandoned at Birth?
It was something I wanted to write my whole life, and yet really didn't feel free to actually until my adoptive parents had passed away. But I realized from a young age that no one really knew what it felt like to be adopted. I mean, everyone that I knew. My parents adopted all 4 of us. We're all different from different biological families, but they did have 4 adopted children. But I didn't know any other adoptees in our town growing up, and people just really didn't know what that meant or what it felt like. And certainly back in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up, it wasn't talked about at all. So I was compelled. I think this is a book that I would have liked to have read growing up. I think it would have affirmed to me that I wasn't crazy or odd or weird. I was having very normal reactions to a very abnormal situation, and that I was not with people that I come from. My DNA, they didn't share my DNA. And though I was loved, I didn't see myself mirrored or reflected in anyone. And I felt very other and very alone. And I was being raised by strangers, albeit strangers that loved me. But that couldn't replace this very fundamental, very deep, very primal need to know who we are and where we come from and see ourselves in the people around us. You know, those comments that so many people take for granted. Oh, you have your grandmother's eyes, or you have your uncle's sense of humor, or do you walk just like when, you have the same cadence as so and so. Those of us who are adopted don't have that very necessary part of childhood development. And it's more impactful than I think people understand it to be.
Do you think having siblings that were also adopted, do you think that helped you when you were growing up to kind of say, well, I'm not alone. I've got 3 other siblings with me, and they're like, they know what it's like, or no?
No, we didn't talk about it.
Oh, wow.
Funny, we all look very different, but we didn't share it with each other. I think my younger sister and I did as we got older. I never talked about it with my brothers, and only recently did my younger brother say that he and my older brother had talked about it, but they never talked about it with the girls. It was interesting. I don't know why. Part of it was the times that we grew up in, but at least we weren't the only, I wasn't the only adopted person I knew. Obviously, that's how my family was formed. But it felt very odd to sit around the dinner table at night. And one of the things I try and explain to people, when you're adopted, you feel the difference. There's a chemical difference. It's sort of like when you sit around the table with really good friends, people that you love and cherish and you consider almost family because you're so close, feel, very close to them, but there's still a different level of closeness when you sit around the dinner table with your family.
Mhm.
There's just another level of just sort of innate chemical, just sort of understanding and belonging and that you get. And when we sat around the dinner table, I was so aware that we were six strangers. No one shared blood. Obviously, my parents didn't share blood, and then none of us shared blood. And it was more like an assembly of people than a family. It not by our behavior, but it was a cellular experience, and you just had to be aware of it. It was just in the air. It was just a fact. And so that when you don't talk about those things and you don't understand them, you just think, well, something's wrong with me. I'm odd. This is weird. Why do I feel this way? And that's actually a perfectly normal way to feel in that situation.
So your search for your birth parents didn't happen to what you already got married. You kind of already all along wanted to know who they were, but that
Yeah,
search.
my whole life, I don't remember a day when I didn't wonder who I was and where I came from and who I looked like. I mean, even as a kindergarten, first grade, I remember those thoughts. But there were no tools. When I was growing up, there wasn't social media, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't DNA testing. So
Mhm.
there were no tools in which to use. And I wrote to my adoption agency at one point and asked for information, but I knew they were limited. They couldn't give me any identifying information. And they gave me some information, and I tried different avenues that came up as I grew up. When I was like college age, there was a website, there was a not a website, a registry that you could sign up for, and they would try and connect searching people. Obviously, my birth mother never registered; she didn't want to find me. So none of the tools that I had at my disposal up until and it actually turned out that it was my agency that connected me. It wasn't any external tool when I was in my 50s, and I finally was able to meet my birth father first, and then eventually my birth mother.
I can't even imagine, if you're looking for your parents and then you get hit with all these roadblocks, these legal roadblocks, what do you wish could be changed about these adoption laws
Oh my
for
gosh, it
kids
is
that are looking for their parents?
it's insanity to me to have legislators who don't understand themselves telling an individual, especially an adult individual, never mind a child, an adult individual,
Mm.
that they can't know their heritage, their authentic identity, and their heritage. And we were, as those of us, especially those of us adopted during the baby scoop era when they were all closed adoptions, my whole lineage and my heritage was taken from me. I was defenseless. I had no say in that. And it was taken and hidden from me. And the legal system sealed everything and prevented me. And then years later, I'm an adult and I'm trying to find out my background, my lineage, never mind medical facts. And you have someone in a office telling you they are looking at the paperwork, but they're saying, no, you can't see that. You can't know who you are. And one of the things I really advocate for is the rights of the adoptee. So we always hear about the wants and desires of adoptive parents. A couple who, for whatever reason, can't have children and they want to adopt a child. One thing I'll say is no one's ever guaranteed children. I know how painful, I can't imagine how painful it is to live without them, but no one should be guaranteed children, and they certainly should not be guaranteed someone else's child. And you hear also about the needs of a birth mother, maybe someone who in that particular point in time can't mother their child and doesn't have maybe family that can take that child. No one talks about the child. No one talks about that person who's not a helpless baby, who has memory. We know now that babies, they have memory of the separation from their birth mother. They have memories that they know that they are with other people. Those people don't sound or smell or act like the body they were a part of for 9 months. And we still talk about more adoptive parents and birth parents, and we're still not paying attention to the needs, just the human needs of the individual being traded between them. And we need to know who we are and where we came from. It's not just a nicety. It's, again, there's this everything we're learning about childhood development. You need to see yourself mirrored. You need the wider family and the kin to sort of place yourself. You need the stories of all the people that came before you, and to really understand yourself. And it's something that is so natural in a non-adoptive family, which is 98% of America, that you don't understand what it's like to not have that. You can't understand what it's like to have never seen your mother's face. You can't understand what it's like to be asked to go live with strangers. Like if I took you tonight and dropped you off at someone's house you don't know and said, you're going to live there for the rest of your life. They're very nice. They're going to love you. They're going to take good care of you. But you're still going to sort of recoil from, well, that feels strange. But we ask that of infants. And especially, it's just such a violation of human rights to take away an individual's heritage and authentic identity and hide that from them. We need to, I feel, be in the open. We need to say, if in fact there are circumstances in which a child needs to be raised by strangers, they still have the right to know their authentic identity. They are of that family. They are not of the adoptive family. They have the traits and characteristics of the family they were born to. And they have the right to know that. All the shame and hidden, the sealed records, which were, there's a lot of history that you can go into. Georgia Tan sealing records because she was stealing babies and selling them back in the 1920s. Adoption has a very dark history. And today it's a multi-billion-dollar a year business in which babies are being taken from mothers who are being pressured to relinquish them, and they're being sold. And it's a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. This isn't something being done in the greatest interest of the child. So, and also, we need to stop measuring a good home by one that's more economically successful than another. I think those of us who have lived as an adoptee will tell you love is not everything you need. It's not enough. It's not everything. It's wonderful. But these other elements of being a human being are critical to us. They're critical to us. And it's hard for people who have it to imagine and to understand the damage when you don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading the book, I just felt for you so much because number one, like you said, nobody in the family looked like you. You heard the story that you were given up at birth, and then you find out that your birth mom didn't even want to see you, which I can't even imagine giving birth and not wanting to see the baby. I mean, as a person, as a mom, I can't even imagine that. And then later on, when you're trying to find out, like when you have children of your own, you're like, okay, what medical conditions run in our family? That at least should be something that should be given to every adopted child. What medical conditions, so that they know later on there's a genetic dispensation for that.
There's so much loss and grief in adoption. It's not a happy thing. It's not a Hallmark story. The relinquishing mother. No one has a baby and gives it up and walks away unscathed. You don't forget that, and you're often, it's a lifelong pain and scar and damage to that woman. It's not an easy thing to do these days. Adoption agencies are, most of what the fees are covering are the marketing materials. They do incredible, glossy, slick marketing campaigns trying to pressure and target, young mothers or mothers who may be in a position where they can't continue to mother their child. And it's shocking what they do. And they put these glossy books together about the potential adoptive parents that make it look like, the best life you can ever imagine. And also, no family is perfect. The very perfunctory kind of screening adoption agencies do, they don't see that 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, those families are going to also have alcoholism or drug abuse or mental health issues or divorce. I mean, no family is without its issues. And so it's very naive to think that. So we have the relinquishing mother who is hurt and very deeply by this experience. And there is the adoptee that certainly lost their heritage and their authentic identity and their sense of self and lives a life of wondering who they are, wondering where they came from, never feeling good enough, always feeling insecure. Those primal wounds of being given away and the insecurity, the damage of, there are these 7 core issues of adoption that, identity and grief and loss and insecurity and intimacy. And there's so many, and guilt and shame, so many things that an adoptee lives with. Even the adoptive parents have lost their, being able to pass along their genetic ways, and they go through, they're very difficult times as they're trying to conceive and not. I mean, there's sadness all over the place. And it is not easy for people to hear. I think in our culture, we want to think that you can easily take someone out of one family and put them in another, but you can't. And also for that child, we've all heard stories of a child maybe in a very really tough family situation. And if they're taken out, they still want to be back in that family situation. I mean, family is your family. And to lose that, it's beyond being loved, and it's beyond, how fancy a house you're in and how many trips your parents are allowed to take. And it's your birthright. It's the right to belong to a family because you're one of them. And yes, you may have issues in that family, but you're going to have issues in any family. And I think the basic fundamental human need for the things that staying in your authentic family and knowing who you are and where you came from and how all those things help someone develop, and the damage that's done when they're missing that is something that I think we need to understand better, to see that adoption should to strangers should only be used under the most critical last ditch circumstances. I think certainly helping mothers keep their children with them, or as next step would be kinship adoption. It's just difficult to explain to people the grief and the loneliness and the anxiety of being given away and being raised by other people.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we need to take a brief commercial break, but we'll be right back. And when we come back, I'll have you read part of your book.
Thank you.
People welcomed me, and they knew the pain of the journey that we'd been on because they'd been there too.
Other Parents Like Me is an online community, peer-led, for parents with kids struggling with mental health and or substances.
It's a space that's safe. Feels like I can actually share what's going on.
We offer 15 daily support groups per week and live speaker talks on Thursdays, as well as a monthly expert panel.
We also have a resource hub that has a toolkit. This includes over 1,000 articles, podcasts. There's a glossary with the most recent and relevant terms. And we have a directory that's been vetted.
The overwhelming feeling when we're sitting in a meeting and I'm telling my story and I see others shaking their head, tears falling, they understand this roller coaster and they're along for the ride.
And we are back with Janet. She's going to read part of her book, Abandoned at Birth, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me. And I want to say this cover is a gorgeous cover. It's gorgeous. It's very eye-catching.
I really liked it when I saw it and thought it really captured a lot about the book.
All right. So, Janet, it's all yours.
Thank you. Chapter 1. Who am I? What am I? These questions are the strongest memory I had of my childhood. I was a mystery, a person unknown, and it frightened me. I couldn't see my reflection without wondering who I looked like and where I came from. I yearned to hear someone say, "You look just like your grandmother," or "You have so-and-so's nose." Anything for a connection to someone real, for an explanation of my existence, how I came to be. My recollections of childhood are ones of feeling disconnected and confused. I was simply there, in the red brick house on a quiet street, in a family where no one shared blood. All my siblings were adopted too. We sat at the dining table between the mahogany sideboard and matching breakfront, a family more carelessly assembled than the dinner menu. My brother Eric, 18 months older than me, was restless and impatient. Mark, 18 months younger, was quiet and nervous. Susie, 7 years younger, watched us all with suspicious eyes. Even as a child, I understood the adoption process. It was part of our bedtime story. Once the agency decided where an infant would be placed, the adoptive parents received a call to come and get the baby. The agency my parents used presented the adoptee to their new parents in an antique cradle with a tall bonnet top. It sat behind ornate pocket doors, which opened with a flourish. I sensed the serendipity of my life. It was so capricious, nothing about me was solid or sure. Had my name been farther up or down the list, I'd have different parents and siblings and a different name. I might be in a worse family or a better one. I imagined the cook's dinner table next door, the cooks with their dark curly hair, round, freckled faces, drinking and dancing. What would it be like to sit among them at mealtimes? Or how about the Stewart's dinner table in their elegant house with a sign in the driveway that pointed to something called the service entrance? But I was here, among this family. Who were they? Who was I? No one looked or moved like anyone else. We didn't share likes or dislikes, strengths or weaknesses. We participated with each other, but didn't belong to each other. There was a disconnect around the table, and you could feel it in the air. Separate force fields surrounded each of us. We were all built from different DNA. Molecules were not shared, and each of us sat in our own genetic dust. It was primal and palpable. Dad ate quickly and quietly. Mom ran back and forth to the kitchen. Eric kicked his legs under the table and itched to be excused. Mark spilled his milk, and Susie fed herself pickled beets. I wondered where all these people came from as my eyes roamed around the table. Where did I come from? I was from stardust or sparks, from a vapor or a thunderclap. I was quicksilver. It was as if I'd been floating on the wind to light on this family. I had borrowed their identity and name, been taught their interests, and felt the falsehood of that every day. When I was 5, I imagined I was a kidnapped Chinese princess, looking at my round face in the mirror with eyes that smiled into slits and short bobbed hair with bangs. I thought I looked just like the Asian girls in my picture book of children around the world. Those illustrations mirrored me more than anyone I knew in real life, and the Chinese princess identity was as plausible as any other. Maybe I'd been kidnapped and brought to America. Right now, I was sure someone was looking for me and wondered what would happen when they found me. I wasn't afraid of being taken back to China. I believed it would feel like home, somewhere I'd be solid, complete, and safe, because when I was reunited with my real family, I'd make sense. I would stare at myself in the mirror as the questions repeated. Who am I? What am I? The endless, unanswered taunts hovered overhead and crashed down on me, looping through my brain until I had a visceral reaction, a jolt of fear, aloneness, and total detachment. I would no longer recognize my reflection and was shocked and scared by how untethered I felt from everything around me. My stomach jumped, a chill spread through me, my heart raced. I felt profoundly alone. I was aware of everyone else in the house, could hear where they were and what they were doing, but I felt like I was a million miles away, and they didn't know I was missing.
I love that so much. I cannot believe that you actually put your heart out like that and just wrote that. That's the very first chapter. And it was like, oh my gosh, what else is she going to write about in this book? And the journey of finding your birth parents wasn't a journey that was easy. How in the world did you get the courage to actually, because you think, you hear these stories of, oh, they didn't want you, going through the adopted child's mind. They didn't want me. They didn't want this. What made you finally have the courage to say, I need to find them? I need to.
It's interesting. It's not only my searching. All I can explain it is, everyone responds to trauma differently. And of course, for many adoptees, they're one to two paths. You even become the perfect child to try and secure your safety in your adoptive home, where you're a rebel and you act out, test the waters. One of the ways I think I dealt with the trauma was, it was like a mystery I had to solve. I kept thinking, if I just get the information, if I just see the truth, I'll feel better. And it's in The Primal Wound by Nancy Newton-Verrier, I think she talks about this drive that some adoptees have. It's like just a drive. You feel like, almost like, if I could connect for a moment with my real mother, my birth mother, I will feel whole and I'll be able to then go on with my life. But I need to find that. It's almost animalistic. It's this need to reconnect with your cells, your authentic family. You're this clan that you've been separated from. So my drive all through life was to go there. Some people deny it. There's a lot of alcoholism, drug abuse. There's a lot of adoptees who just deny that they're feeling the things they're feeling, or don't feel free to talk about them. And I was just driven to like research and study and find out, hoping that that knowledge would free me from the sadness and the grief and the anxiety that I was living with. So it was a compulsion, really. I was trying to heal myself by getting the answers, and thinking that would make me feel whole. So it was just a drive.
So you said you felt like that anxiety and everything. So did that free you when you actually met them, or did you feel like, oh my gosh?
It helped a lot. I mean, it's interesting. Being adopted, it's a grief, and you never get over grief. We don't say to people, "Are you over your grief yet for losing a loved one?" You just learn to accept it in your life, and walk alongside it. And I felt so much more whole. I now get why I'm the way I am, why I look the way I look, and why I act the way I act, because I am definitely one of both of my biological families. So it gave me more peace than I'd ever had, more wholeness than I ever had. I finally made sense. But you never, the foundational, I was in my 50s, late 50s, before I had that first connection, which was profound and transformative. But my whole life, I'd missed that. And so the foundational and the neurobiological, I mean, they're showing now that, the trauma that infant goes through when they're separated from their family, there's real trauma and neurobiological damage done. And so I think all the anxiety and that I suffered, and the panic attacks and that I lived with, were a result of that trauma. And it's never gone, but I'm more at peace than I've ever been. And I'm so grateful that I was able to get the answers that I was seeking. And then there's a whole process of realizing that I will, just as I felt like I was really never a member of my adoptive family because we didn't share blood, I'm also feel like I'm really not a member of my biological families because we didn't share life. We don't have a lot of memories together. And so you end up basically always feeling alone as an adoptee. And now I have wonderful children and a grandchild and a wonderful husband, but that's not the foundational. It's late in life. It's wonderful, and I'm so grateful for it. But the damage was done, foundationally and primally, and you just sort of have to get comfortable with living with that. I'm sort of in a never land of not being really a part of any of these families.
So let's talk about meeting your biological parents and what that meant to you. I mean, because your biological dad didn't even know you even existed. And that must have been a mind blower right there. But
I
he
know.
embraced you with open arms.
Yeah, that was amazing because he was 75 years old and didn't know he had fathered me at age 18, and received a phone call the night from the agency. And yet, yeah, he just embraced me with open arms, and it was so profound. I mean, again, I didn't know two things about this man. When we finally met, as the agency suggested, we met at a place halfway between our homes. My husband was with me, and then two of my siblings, his other children, were with him. And I knew nothing about him. I couldn't find anything about him online. I was such a nervous wreck. And yet, again, couldn't answer 5 questions about the man. Saw him. He looked into my eyes and just said, "You're Janet." And I looked into his, and I finally made sense. It was like this instant, like this big black hole I'd always lived with. I always talk about this big black hole in my gut. Literally, even not yet getting, having had a conversation and knowing a lot about each other, the minute our eyes connected and he was holding my hands, I felt that big black hole fill up. It was instantaneous. It was just like, whoom. And it didn't make sense because I still didn't know anything about him. He could have been an idiot, a jerk, he could have been awful. And instead of just the lovely man he was. And so it was this cellular, visceral connection. It was uncanny. And from that moment on, whenever I was with any of my biological family members, even not knowing a lot about their life experiences and everything, I felt more at home and at peace and found than I'd ever experienced before in life. It's like my cells recognized their kin, over the decades. And it's just the most profound and incredible biological, visceral feeling. And then even my birth mother, who, as I describe in the book, was not welcoming and not warm. A few times I met her, she was emotionally keeping me at an arm's length, but I felt at the same time as I was dealing with that, I was also feeling like, oh my God, there I am. Like that's
Mhm.
that's my origin. So it's very profound and very important for me to meet my biological family.
Now, I wanted to ask you the perspective of your birth parents when you went to go, I mean, your adopted parents, when you went to go find your birth parents, were they supportive of it, or were they kind of like, you kind of had to keep it quiet for a little bit?
They were, they adopted 4 children, and at one point, served on the board of the adoption agency and stuff. So they were schooled in that for as much as people back then were ever schooled on
Mhm.
adoption. When I first was struggling with things in college, my mother said, "Oh, you should search," but I just could tell by the way she said that, and knowing her as I did, that she was trying to be supportive, but she didn't really mean it. And the message I got, just like all children can read between the lines when their parents say something that's not sincere, the message I got was, you can search, but we're going to be devastated if you do. And so for a long time, I denied that I wanted to search or that I would search. I put it in the back burner. First of all, I didn't have any real tools to do it with, but I also thought, oh, I just want to see them, but I don't want to really meet them, or I don't need another family. I'm happy with I just, and I hear that story again and again and again with adoptees and often younger adoptees, which are trying to work through all of these. It's very complicated to be adopted, and
Mhm.
the guilt and the shame and the feelings you have and the worry. And again, especially if you have a good adoptive family and you love them and you don't want to hurt them. And you're really silenced and held back from your own self and impulses because you're always worrying what the people who are caring for you want from you, and you're always trying to meet those needs so that you feel safe. And so I got that message. I denied wanting to search for a long time, but I always did. And I was literally everywhere I went, every crowd of people I was in, I was looking at every face wondering, could you be my mother? So it was just and so when I did finally search, it was late in my life, and they were both in their 90s and not doing well. And I wanted to share it with them. I wished I could have, but and my mother had some strokes, and she wasn't all there. And I just thought, I don't want them to feel like I'm trying to replace them, younger parents. I don't want them to feel betrayed or hurt. I still took care of them until they both died. I was the daughter they needed and wanted. At the same time, I was searching for and finding my origins and myself. And it only finding what I did and meeting my authentic self actually, I think, made me a better daughter. That made me, I was more whole and more complete myself. And I could be even more present and grateful for them. But I didn't tell them because I didn't want to hurt them.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't about them. It was never that they didn't give me enough love or enough care. It was just that I needed to know this for myself. This was what was going to make me whole and comfortable in my own skin. And no amount of love and, would give me that. I had to find that out.
Yeah, because that way you can have a story that goes along with your origins instead of a story that you continue to rewrite and rewrite in your head. Like, why didn't they want me? Why didn't they, I'm not lovable. I'm not
Yeah.
wanted,
Yeah.
and that's
There's something wrong with me. That's the story. That's the feeling you have as an adoptee. Something was wrong with me. My mother gave me up. I mean, that's a pretty harsh thing. But also you felt like the whole time growing up, I'd look at pictures of their families, their grandparents, their aunts and uncles. And it would be interesting, like, oh, those are interesting people. I mean, I love my parents. Oh, that's neat to see dad's grandfather or grad's other siblings. But I always just had this strong feeling that those aren't my people. I'm not related to those people. That those are interesting, but it's not me. And so you just feel in so many ways these disconnects that other people take for granted. And even when I had my own children, my sons were the first blood relatives I ever saw. And I was trying to find myself in them, but I didn't have any other point of view. I didn't have any other point of reference. Like, I didn't have any other biological kin. And so as much as I could see myself in either of them, okay, great. But it wasn't until I had my son and his wife 10 months ago had their first child, so our first grandchild. And in that little girl, I saw my son so much. I saw myself, and I just finally was hit with this, oh my God, like I'm passing something along that started way before me and went through me. And then she's going to take it out into the world and it's going to keep going. It's like, that was such a profound experience. I literally never had that. And I could see myself in her and my birth father in her. But I also was all aware that my adoptive parents aren't in her. And so it's just, again, that lineage and all that we learn about ourselves from the story and the experience of blood relatives is something I never experienced growing up, and having experienced now, I feel is so critical to human development. And we don't really talk about it or acknowledge it, especially in these days. We all talk about, we can choose our identity. And for those of us that had an identity chosen for us when we didn't agree to it, we might say, I guess you can be free to choose a different identity if you know the one you're leaving, if you're choosing to leave one. But if you don't know your identity at all, you yearn for your authentic identity.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you met your birth father, but soon after you meeting him, he passed away. So how that was like, I was so excited that you met him when I read in the book. And then when he passed away, I was like, oh man, all those years that she could have easily have spent, and you met siblings, and when you went to the hospital and he's like, she's my daughter. And that acceptance that, oh, I can just imagine what you felt at that point.
It was just, I know when my brother told me that, he had a month to live yet, it was just this well of grief came up again. It was like, no, I haven't had enough time. I just met him, and I was so of him. I mean, I was just so much his daughter that we had such a good time together. And again, that brother and his wife and my nephew are coming up next week for the week. I mean, we're still close, and I so appreciate that. But yeah, that was heartbreaking. We had 2 years together, and I'm grateful for that, but it wasn't enough to make up for a lifetime apart.
Now, did your adopted siblings go on a similar path trying to find their parents, or did they already know where their parents were?
No, my younger sister wanted to, watch my journey and really wanted to take her on. And so we did find her birth mother, and that was wonderful for her. Again, the same thing when we met her, we were like, oh my God, they're two peas in a pod. And my older brother, when I searched, my older brother had already had a stroke and was not doing well and really could not talk anymore. And so it wasn't the right time in his life to start something like that. It is an emotional, it's a really hard thing to search and then try and integrate your biological self and your adopted self. It's not easy. And I can see why a lot of people avoid it or numb it or, but and I had help. I mean, I had therapy, I had loving, husband and friends, and there's a lot to read out there. Nowadays, there is also a lot of online groups to connect with and learn more about it, and adoptive therapists. But I'm so glad I did it. But it's not an overnight easy thing to do. And my younger brother, who had always said, no, I don't want to search. Mom and dad are our parents, about a year ago said to me, I was only saying that because I was being defensive. Like, if they didn't want me, to hell with them, I don't want them either. And he said, I do want to search now. And he's in his late 60s, and he just got about a month ago, got the first bit of information about his origins. So he's excited to be on that journey now.
Yeah, because at one point, did you think, oh, maybe I waited too late to do this? Maybe my birth parents have passed away and
Yes.
will never get a chance to know?
Yes, I absolutely did. And I was really scared about that. And I waited too long. I was, again, this feeling of gratitude and to my adopted parents. I didn't want to hurt them. And I thought, oh, what if I find them? And well, I guess it was more writing the book. I didn't want to write the book until they had passed because I didn't want to hurt them in any way. But yeah, you do. You worry a lot that it's going to be too late. And in many cases, like my younger sister, her father had already passed away. I've heard so many people who talk about going on a search and finding sadly that one or both of their biological parents had already passed. And that's devastating. Even without knowing them, you now lost so much. Often really helps to meet with then siblings or other family members. They can really provide a lot of that link, that side of you. And I know a lot of people who will say, oh, I know adopted kids and they don't want to search and they're so happy. But they're really not free to tell the truth. This feeling of, gratitude and fear and not being worthy and all the feelings you have as an adoptee. And so you really can't speak the truth out loud. So it may be going on in there and they're just burying it deeper and deeper. And then they're rewarded when people say, oh, aren't you a good person for not, you just love your adopted kids and you're so lovely and nice. And that's really further stilting the development of an individual by having to live with this great burden of gratitude to have lost their true heritage themselves. And again, love is wonderful, but it's not enough for a human being to be whole and healthy. And adoptees have 33% higher attempts at suicide and much greater hospitalizations of mental health and addiction issues. This is a trauma that we live with that's not recognized and not spoken about. And it's the only trauma I know of in which the victims are expected to be grateful. And it's so hard. People get so offended if you say love is not enough. And shouldn't that child be grateful to be in a better home? What might we have been able to do to keep that child with their original family and home? And yes, maybe they would have had some difficulties growing up in that family. But again, every family has difficulties. And now you've compounded that for that child by giving them all the trauma and loss that they're experiencing having been adopted. And then they're having to face issues in their adoptive family as well. So it's not easy. There's no, clean, clear, easy answer, but it is. I hope people open their hearts and minds to the viewpoint and the needs of the child that's given away and grows up like me as a real adult. And I've had a wonderful life and have worked hard at, overcoming terrible panic disorder and all sorts of other things by going there, by going to the feelings and getting therapy and reading and studying. And it was very hard, but I'm here to talk about it. And as a friend of mine said, who's also adopted, she goes, those of us who are adopted wouldn't wish this on anyone. That's quite a statement because often we've had externally lovely lives. Anyone who knows me, so many people who know me were shocked by the book. They said, oh, I just thought you had a perfect life. And, it's what's going on, like all of us in all of our lives. It's what's going on below the covers and, below between the pages of the book. And that you're not free or don't feel free or safe to talk about and that you're struggling with. And I hope that we begin to see the trauma in adoption and bring it into the light and talk about it and work towards changing the way our system is run so that it's not a for-profit industry, but something that truly serves the needs of children in crisis.
For sure. At least if not, the minimal they can do is at least provide a family history of medical issues so that the adopted child knows or the adopted parents know that if something comes up, it's in your genealogy, it's in your genetics, instead of just flying blind, not realizing anything, that you may be predisposed to some kind of illnesses that would be so much easier to treat instead of having to run all these tests on children, because I can imagine that trauma alone for a child is so much. So just having that on.
Yeah. And now of course the DNA websites that, you can find out a lot of family secrets are revealed at those websites, but it's so important. And it's in other ways too, the children now that were donor conceived are organizing and saying, you know what, it's not enough to know just one parent. We need to know the family that we came from. We don't need that man to parent us, but we need to know what families we're from, what families we're members of. And we need to know this. And people have a hard time understanding that. Again, they're thinking about the needs of a woman to, single and wants to parent a child. That's great. But think of the needs of the child you're creating, because you're creating a lot of trauma and difficulty for that child that just you're loving them. We shouldn't be wanting children to fill needs in the adult. the adult should be struggling and dealing with their own issues and losses and circumstances. You're now asking a child to fill needs that they shouldn't be created to need. We really need to understand these issues so that as new things are happening in the world, we can address them from a more informed perspective and know at least the minimum, what they need, what we need to supply for them to help them in these very unusual and not normal, not natural circumstances if they're being asked to be raised in those circumstances. So there's, I hope getting a glimpse at what it feels like to be adopted and will open hearts and minds to the broader discussion and apply it when they're thinking and talking with people about even some of these other issues that are coming up in our world, our ever-changing world.
Yes, that is so true, because most of the time when you hear about somebody adopting somebody, oh, they're so lucky to get them so and so as parents, and they don't think about the child, and all they think of, oh, what a great thing for them to adopt someone, but then when you look and nobody in your family looks like you or acts like you, or you don't know some of the quirks are from your biological family, you're like wondering, and you're out there, and we all suffer from identity crisis, but I can imagine for adoptees it's like 1,000 times worse because you can't identify with anybody.
There's nothing to push back against. There's just nothing. You really feel alone in the world. That's all you feel so alone in the world. And you don't want anyone to feel that way, but you do, despite love. And that's the hard thing. People go, but you're loved and you have a good home. Yes. But unfortunately, that's not enough to heal a human being who's basically adrift in the world. They've given up by the family their birth mother gave them up, and random people are raising them. And that's a weird situation to be put in. And it is very complicated. And children aren't blank slates. That's not lost on them. They feel it. They may not be able to talk about it. So you may be fooled into thinking, oh, look, they're a good, compliant, well-behaved child. Well, that's because they're terrified. They don't want to be given away again. And so it's, those of us who are now adult, let's talk about it and really be honest about what we went through and what we experienced and what we were dealing with, so that people know and understand better. And again, I've never met someone who hasn't wanted to search. In fact, one quick story, a woman came to a book signing and said her mother, who was in her 90s and had been adopted, on her deathbed, who had never searched, took her daughter's hand and said, I am so sorry I never searched you. Please search and find our family. So it's there. It's there.
Well, our time is almost up. Is there one last little nugget that you want to either reiterate, something that you mentioned before that you think is impactful, or something that we didn't touch on that you want to leave us with?
Just say, understand that adoption is a trauma, and it's a culturally unrecognized trauma. And again, it's one in which the victim is expected to be grateful. And please open your mind to the point of view of the adoptee and understand what they've lost, and how, gratitude for an adoptive family isn't enough to heal them. And so if we can get beyond the stereotype, the rainbows and puppy dogs and fantasy of adoption, and look at what it really is a sad and difficult situation for everybody. Let's all work to try and change the system when we have the ability to vote on something or have a conversation with somebody about it. Let's work for the child at the center of adoption.
Sure. Now, where can people find you?
My website is abandoned@birthbook.com, and I'm on active Instagram account at Janet Sherlund Official.
And the book is Abandoned at Birth. You can get it on Amazon, but where else can you get it?
Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, Books A Million, any of the usual sources.
Thank you, Janet, for coming on and for sharing your story. Guys, this is one book that definitely will open your eyes about adoption, because you're right. They only think about how grateful you're supposed to be adopted. They don't think about all the internal struggles that an adopted child goes through. And it really opened my eyes as well. So thank you.
Two things can be true at once. You can be grateful for a good adoption and yet traumatized by being adopted. So.
Yeah, for sure. So guys, pick up the book, Abandoned at Birth. I have the Amazon link up here on the thing right now, because Amazon's easy. People tend to go to Amazon and all. And if somebody is interested in learning more about how they can find out about their birth birth parents? Would you be interested in helping them along the way? Like,
Sure, I'm happy to answer any questions I can. Again, that's usually by state by state. Most states still have birth records sealed. Now a handful have them open, but I'm happy to help in any way or direct them to any resource.
because I know a lot of adoptees are like, where do I start?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Been there.
Been there, done that, and wrote the book actually about it. So guys, until next time, have a blessed day. Bye.